people have got this this understandably mixed attitude, mixed feeling about relationship. They want it, they can't help but want it because that's part of being human. And yet they're scared, they're inhibited from being in relationship because that's the way that our culture has developed. Now, I don't know how to solve that, but I think we do have this big cultural difficulty, very, very deeply embedded in our culture, not a kind of thing you can solve tomorrow. I think one of my colleagues was the pastor of a church that he built up into being not quite a mega church, but pretty big from being very small. But then he describes how he realized that in a lot of ways it wasn't much more than a secular club with religious labels on it. And that it had to become more Christian, more kingdom-oriented. And so they started doing, for instance, a Spanish language service and things like that. And people started coming to church who weren't the kind of people that you particularly normally expected to come to church and so on. The number of people in his church dropped from, from a four-figure thing down into a three-figure number. And that kind of illustrates the problem, really, that, and I think it's to do with the place of the church in American culture. The way I sometimes picture it is as something like 50 years or so ago, you could reasonably reckon that the culture was reasonably Christian. There wasn't that big a gap between the way the culture was and the way that Christian faith expected things to be. But the culture has gone more and more radically non-Christian over the past 50 years in its focus, particularly on stuff, on things. In other words, I'm not talking about, say, sex, though you could talk about that, but more about particularly the focus on work and buying things and having a bigger house and all those kind of things. And so the church has carried on being the culture slightly baptized, but the culture has moved so far that consequently the church has become much more radically de-Christianized. And so the biggest challenge for the church is to become the church, to reconsider, to re-examine, to rediscover what Christian faith is about, instead of it being simply a kind of baptizing of the culture, and to work with the difference between. There was a great story I read somewhere recently, I can't remember where I read it, about a time when in Evanston they were trying to do something years ago now about avoiding, I think there was some way in which people from ethnic minorities weren't allowed to buy property in what had been traditionally white areas. And there was a meeting of some kind of social action groups who were trying to do something about this. And eventually somebody pointed out that most of the people who were involved, the property owners and the realtors, were people who were involved in the churches. And so surely the thing to do was to get the churches to work on the churches rather than trying to work on the local council. But somebody else said, no, we couldn't get the Christians to change. It's, until you've got to get the law in. Well, if that's the case, we might as well pack up and go home, really.
Right. That reminds me of what Gandhi said. I'd be a Christian if it weren't for the Christians.
That's right, yeah.